Mr. Garrett.
There we go. And thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following off on a couple of those questions before I get to some other ones. So Mr. Ryan was asking an initial question. Your response back with regard to monetary policy is whether monetizing the debt and the like. You said, well, your actions right now have been short-term in nature, to his question, as opposed to permanent actions, which could, if I understood you, would be effectively monetizing the debt. Right? I guess then the question comes is, if you had implemented permanent, there's nothing that would have precluded the Fed somewhere down the road to undo their action later on. You're not bound by your decisions today. So anything that's actually permanent is also changeable by the Fed, correct? There's nothing permanent that you would do today that you couldn't undo.
What's key here is expectations, and the markets don't expect inflation, which means they expect us to undo this process at the appropriate time.
Right. And effectively, so what you have is a definition between, difference between one's interpretation of what is permanent and what is temporary. And I would imagine that no Fed chairman would ever come to this table and to witness table and say, I am engaging in permanent monetizing of the debt. That no matter how they would describe it to us, they would describe it as, I'm only taking a temporary action to get over this period that we're in right now. Isn't that correct?
That's what we're doing, is a temporary action. But of course, the Fed always buys securities for various reasons. For example, that's how we create the currency that right. Americans use every day.
Right. But this is obviously outside the norm as far as your balance sheet.
That's right.
That's right. And part of your opening comments was the fact that, well, one of the good sides we're in right now, of course, is that consumer spending is going along, which is sort of pulling the economy going forward, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that in part because of exactly what you're doing, whether we call it permanent or temporary? It's because of that basically cheap money that is out there that's encouraging all of us to say that, hey, it's cheaper to borrow right now, so I can actually increase my consumer spending.
That's how monetary policy works all the time, right. Not just now.
Right. But so in the area of housing, however, you had said back, not just last year with regard to housing policy, the age-old question of what caused us to get into this situation, and you said, well, I don't think it was really monetary policy, I'm paraphrasing here, that got us into this situation. And I know the old line that if you get 3 economists in a room, you'll come up with 4 different definitions on what economic policy should be. When you were saying that, about 3/4 of business economists were just saying the opposite of that. They said that it was a cheap monetary policy that was bringing us into this situation. So you disagree on that point with a number of other economists as whether that was the low cost of money that actually exacerbated the housing problem, right?
Right.
Right. But now you're basically using, on the other hand, say we're going to use that exact same policy of basically cheap money to do what? To try to drive up the cost of housing in order to pull us out of this economic morass, right?
Price of housing isn't responding at all to the policy.
But that's your ultimate goal here, isn't it? Basically, if we have the cheap money, that people will be able to start buying houses again, will hit the bottom and housing prices will go back up again, right?
Again, that's the way the monetary policy works, by lowering rates of return so people will be more willing to spend.
I'm in this quandary here. On the one hand, you're saying that in the past, when you had, not you, your predecessor had a cheap monetary policy, that really didn't cause the problem because monetary policy really wasn't driving the cost of the housing and causing the problems that we have here. Now, however, you're going to use that exact same formula to say, yeah, well, actually it does have a significant, or should, we hope so, have a significant impact upon the monetary policy. So I'm at a quandary as to which is it from the Fed, whether it had an impact in the past or will it have an impact in the future. If you don't think it had an impact in the past, why do you think it's going to have an impact now on housing?
It should have an effect that's proportionate to the interest rate change. Now, the housing bubble we saw earlier in this decade was far greater than can be explained by the monetary policies at that time, which is one of the reasons why I don't think that the monetary policy was a major source of that bubble.
Okay. Very quickly, in the last minute and 15 seconds, with regard to spending, wouldn't significant reductions or addressing the short-term spending aspects be good for the market and the economy, despite some of the critics on the other side that says this may be detrimental to overall growth?
Well, again, I think it's really a question of convincing the market that there's a long-term plan here, and to the extent that that was part of a long-term plan, it could be helpful, yes.
Okay. Well, Moody's looking at us, what we're doing in Washington. I guess they're optimistic as to what we will do because they came out a month ago with their report looking at their fiscal health, looking at 3 categories, the debt to GDP, the debt to revenue, and the interest payment revenue. And they said that the U.S. exceeds the median level of AAA rated nations for all these other categories and concludes that it would expect to see, quote, constructive efforts to reduce the current deficits as well as constructive efforts to control long-term growth of entitlement and spendings. I guess they're optimistic as to what Washington does. Making those things. Are you optimistic that we're going to be able to make those hard choices even if they make some significant cuts in spending right now?
Well, I'm not certain, and that's why I'm making this case that I hope that people will listen and take seriously the responsibility to address this problem.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Doggett.
Thank you very much for your service, Mr. Chairman.